Hi guys, I hope you're all well. As you can see, I'm trying out a new look, which was made for me by a YouTuber called Enzonian, and I think it's brilliant, man. Thanks very much for doing that for me. So, these days, saying that there are only two genders is on par with being racist, sexist, or homophobic. What makes this so troubling is that it's not just adults making decisions about themselves, but also about their very young children, and that's what I want to discuss today. Very quickly before I delve into it, I'd like to address something else. There is a YouTuber called Femandrogen Kim who has responded to two of my videos. They offer a purely subjective argument and see gender as, quote, society created bullshit. Now, I've already addressed in another video the biological and evolutionary factors in gender as well as sex, so I'll assume, Kim, this is one of my videos you haven't watched, and because I don't like repeating myself, I'll just link it below for your viewing pleasure. Now, despite seeing me as a true scum bigoted shit, Kim does concede that there is no evidence for non-binary brains before saying this.
But what about the brain evidence, you cry? There simply is no evidence for non-binary brains. Well, not yet. No studies have been done on people who self-identify as non-binary. And even brain evidence for male and female brains, and the corresponding evidence that trans men have male brains and trans women have female brains, is not as conclusive as people like to believe. Brain structures change with people's environment and experience. It's kind of how brains work, how we form experiences and memories in the first place. And hormones change brain structures. That's kind of how brains get gendered in the first place. Aren't most transgendered individuals in these studies on some kind of hormones?
One of the studies I cite in the video link below examined the vast amount of differences between male and female brains, but I'll also link a study carried out by the National Distance Education University in Madrid, which examined the brains of 24 female to males and 18 male to females, both before and after treatment with cross-sex hormones. Their results showed that even before treatment, the brain structures of the trans people were more similar in some respects to the brains of their experienced gender than those of their natal gender. Now, I get a lot of messages from people who are non-binary, or at least claim to be, and I've enjoyed my discussion with most of them, so I just thought it best to clarify that point as I was apparently not clear enough in my original video. Now, non-binary identities, of which there is a rapidly expanding glossary of terms from genderqueer to pangender, and even gender expansive, are not just ridiculous because they lack any empirical evidence, but also because they are the main motivational force behind this new disturbing trend of listing dozens of unnecessary new identities for people to choose from. We've all seen this fad hitting Facebook and also the popular dating site OkCupid, which introduced 21 different gender options for people to choose from, including agender, bigender, and two-spirit. But while we have an increasing number of people becoming obsessed with gender to the point where they bring it up at every possible opportunity, we also have another brand which claims that gender is so unimportant that it shouldn't even be mentioned on our identity papers. For example, there are now people who believe that passports and driving licenses should not state if the holder is male or female because it causes problems for transgender people. Of course it doesn't, because trans men are men, ergo their papers say male, as the same as with trans women. So what they really mean is that it causes problems for non-binary people. But anyway, the MP introducing this is Maria Miller, who chairs the Women and Equalities Committee because of course she does, and she says the government should strip back talking about gender unless it was necessary. This is because a person's gender is apparently not relevant on official documents and simply creates an unconscious bias in job and university applications. I find this to be an interesting excuse from Miss Miller, seeing as job positions and university placements don't ask to look at your driver's licence and instead ask to see your qualifications. And seeing as how more women than ever before here in the UK are now being accepted into universities, 35% more likely to go than men, actually. One would have to assume that having female on your papers must be working in your favour. As I've said, since starting this channel, I've spoken to dozens of people who identify as non-binary, and the vast majority of them were very civil, and we ended up having a very pleasant discussion. Mostly ending with her having to agree to disagree, but If you're an adult, you're free to make whatever choices in life you desire, and you can identify as whatever the hell you want. It's your life. But if we have binary concepts that are accepted, such as cis man and cis woman, and trans man and trans woman, which is completely unnecessary because cis men and trans men are men, and cis women and trans women are women, but whatever, this implies that there are only two options, man and woman, which removes the gender spectrum theory held up by non-binary folk. I'm often given a lot of shit by non-binary people for denying their existence. But if we are to believe that gender is a spectrum, then why do transgender people feel a desire to transition to the opposite sex? Why do their brains reflect more similarities to the opposite gender? The spectrum cannot exist if transgender people exist, and there is only scientific evidence for one of these conditions. The idea that gender is not binary disregards the experiences of transsexual people who choose to transition. If there is indeed a spectrum, how can one become the opposite sex? A human develops a female brain, or through testosterone in the womb, a masculinized brain. This is something I speak about at length in my video link below. A brain either remains female or develops into a male brain. It cannot be both, it cannot be neither. So here's a question for you. Why do men have nipples? You see, we all come from a common genetic and developmental framework. That is to say, we all start as a generic embryo. Without testosterone, you would be born female. But even before your hormones begin to affect you when you're a fetus, your body already started developing female parts. This is why men have nipples, which are formed very early during development. Women produce hormones like prolactin and oxytocin that allow their nipples to produce milk. Men do not need nipples, but they have them because every single one of us start out on the road to being a female until hormones kick in and change this in biological men. There is no in between, there is no neither. You're either male or female. So when gender politics starts to be force-fed to children, this is when this topic moves very swiftly away from whatever territory to we have a problem territory. Okay, so I've got a plethora of stories to go through with you today, but I'll ease you in gently, okay? At the beginning of the year, Buster Books, which is the publisher of colouring books for brilliant boys and gorgeous girls, has decided to switch to gender-neutral titles in the future. Girls will no longer be defined as glamorous and gorgeous, while boys get to be amazing and brilliant. The publisher has long been a target of the campaigning group Let Books Be Books, a group of parents who have worked since 2014 to persuade publishers that gendered books send out a very limiting message to children. As blue covers with themes of action and adventure, robots, space and trucks and pirates contrast with a riot of pink sparkles, fairies, princesses, flowers and butterflies. Is this not just fucking first world problems if you've ever heard them before? Buster Books, whose owner Michael O'Mara, told The Guardian in 2014 that when you have a colouring book which is specifically for a little boy or a girl, it sells 3 times as many copies as one without the sexual categorisation. Nonetheless, they announced on Twitter that our publishing aim is to make sure that going forward all titles are gender neutral. So, whatever, right? Parents demanding that gendered books be replaced with gender neutral books doesn't seem that bad, does it? Never mind that some little girls actually like girly books and some little boys actually like boyish books, it's not really hurting anyone. Well, how about these gender-free camps that have started to pop up recently? That is, camps for gender non-conforming children that provides a safe place for biological boys who feel more comfortable in dresses and wigs than in Spider-Man t-shirts and jeans. Because again, these people can't seem to wrap their heads around the idea that kids not conforming to gender stereotypes doesn't mean that they're a third gender. But let's take a look at some of these questions. Can you explain the term gender fluid? We use so many different terms. A lot of the kids don't like referring to themselves as boys. Some of them will be gay, some of them will be trans, and some of them will be somewhere in between. But what do you mean they'll be somewhere in between? Trans and gay are 2 completely different things. How the fuck can you be somewhere in between gay and trans, you fucking retard? Gender creative, gender independent, gender variant, gender non-conforming. Essentially, I would define it as children who do not conform to society's expectations of what a typical boy or girl should be. I think we're just beginning to form a vocabulary. I'm going to guess that it's not the little boys slapping the labels gender independent or gender non-conforming onto themselves. My guess is that the kid likes to play dress up, which is normal for kids regardless of their biological sex. And now these arseholes are telling these poor boys that they're not boys, that they're gender variants. Newsflash, boys can wear dresses and play with dolls and still be fucking boys. What are some of the anxieties parents have when raising gender creative biological boys? I think the biggest concern is bullying at school. Often the children might be excluded from activities, especially sleepovers and birthday parties, because the other parents aren't really open to having a child who's atypical in their midst. That's why the parents of these kids have become the most incredible advocates. They just hope to normalise gender non-conformity. Okay, listen, bullying happens. It's never acceptable, but it happens. It's bad enough that we're seeing safe spaces on university campuses, but now these very young children are going to have no idea how to handle confrontation when they grow up because they've been shipped off to these gender-free camps. The reality is, as cruel as it may be, that if these boys grow up thinking they can be gender non-conforming and not face any judgmental remarks, they're going to have no idea how to handle themselves in the future. Wear a skirt if you want, kid, but if you rock up to high school telling people your pronouns are neutral, you're in for a very rude awakening, and you have your parents to blame for that. What sort of mental health problems and social problems do gender non-conforming boys tend to face? A lot of these kids experience low-grade bullying. It creates a lot of stress and anxiety about going to school or being in public places because of the fear of being excluded. However, if the school is very progressive, it keeps an open dialogue, it can be great. Schools have such power to normalise gender non-conformity, some choose to, and some really push against it. Again, gender non-conformity is fine, but we all know you're not talking about boys wearing makeup and girls wearing trousers, are you? You're talking about children being gender variants, who are neither boys or girls, which, if you want this to be taught in schools, is absolutely disgraceful. What the fuck is your kid going to think when he sits down for a biology class and realises you've been lying to him this whole time? PC culture has become obsessed with gender, even more so than it's been with race and sexuality. But these people are confusing gender expression with identity. Gender is not fluid, but language is and our expression is. We can call ourselves whatever we want, we can wear any label we want, we can even try to redefine long-held definitions. This does not make any of it true. Call yourself gender fluid as much as you like, but I will ask you again, if gender is fluid and men and women don't necessarily exist, why the hell do trans people feel the need to transition to the opposite sex? You see, what is fluid is gender expression. A boy can like pink and a girl can like blue. These kids can express themselves and their gender however they please. But this does not mean that the boy isn't a boy and the girl isn't a girl. You are causing unnecessary confusion when you demand gender fluidity be embraced and taught in schools, and that gender neutral pronouns be applied to these kids. Now, I got the next couple of examples sent to me by someone here on YouTube, and the more I learn, the more unsettling it becomes. CJ was 2.5, says his mother Laurie Duran, when it became clear that he was different. Gender creative, gender non-conforming, gender fluid, gender variant. Laurie would learn all the euphemisms. CJ was suddenly one of them. He had discovered one of his mum's Barbie dolls that fateful afternoon, and his face, his whole being, lit up. Until then, he'd become quickly bored with his brother's hand-me-down toys and with the trucks and kiddie sports gear brought just for him. Now, the first doll, always in hand or by his side, CJ had connected, both his parents say, with something fundamental about himself. I fear for the safety and acceptance of my youngest son CJ, who is gender non-conforming. CJ doesn't conform to traditional gender norms, he is a boy, he knows that and doesn't want it to change, but as he says it, he only likes girl stuff and wants to be treated like a girl. I used to shy away from telling people about CJ's gender nonconformity before they had a chance to meet him, but I've learned over the years that it's beneficial to talk with CJ's teachers about it as early as possible. Plus, he prefers that I make the announcement ahead of him. He wants everybody to know that he is gender non-conforming, but he doesn't want to see their reactions because he's seen some pretty negative ones. People shaking their heads in disappointment, laughing like his gender non-conformity is a joke, and grown men calling him a sissy. I don't expect CJ's teachers to know the distinct difference between sex and gender. I just hope that they are empathetic, with an open heart and an open mind. Teachers need to know that CJ's gender nonconformity affects his learning and time at school. I'll come back to this. They can expect my son to draw himself as a girl, to mix up his pronouns, to have a hard time deciding which bathroom to use, to always choose pink if it's an option, and to feel uncomfortable if the class is divided by boys and girls. He will do all of those things one day, and then he might not do them the next. His gender fluidity is just that. Fluid. Okay, first of all, why the fuck is his gender fluidity affecting his learning at school? Boys and girls attend the same class. They are set the same tasks. Your gender should have absolutely no impact on your learning. And secondly, if he knows he's a boy, then why does he want female pronouns sometimes and want to use the female bathroom sometimes? He's a boy. You just said he knows he's a boy and he doesn't want that to change. So he's going to get male pronouns and he's going to use the boys' bathroom. Honestly, this is fucking mind-blowing, man. She goes on. It's the academic portion of school that he struggles with, sometimes because he's more focused on his gender nonconformity and how it's being perceived. This is absolutely ridiculous. How does his gender affect his math lessons, his English lessons, his reading? This mother is so obsessed with her child's gender, and she has made it the most important part about him to the point that this kid can't even function properly at school. It's disgraceful. Telling her 2.5-year-old son that he's a gender variant because he picked up a fucking Barbie doll is bad enough, right? But now he can't even learn properly at school because he's obsessed with his gender after years of his mother's bullshit. Why, you might ask, would his mother do this to him? Well, would you fucking believe it, because she's wrote a book about it. Of course she did. Just let your son play with the Barbie without filling his head with "you're crazy, you stupid cunt." And next we have what I wish I'd known about gender when I became a parent. And you see there that she describes herself as a proud mum of a gay son. That's always seemed kind of strange to me. If I ever raise kids, I wouldn't give a shit if they turned out gay. I'll be proud of them for doing well at school, for being good people, for achieving the goals that they set for themselves. The sexuality of my future hypothetical kids really doesn't interest me enough to earn my pride. It soon became obvious that Danny was different than the other boys. He loved Barbie dolls, dressing up in skirts and shimmery things, and preferred playing with girls. I didn't know there were other children like Danny and felt lost. Was there something wrong with him? Was I failing as a parent? For fuck's sake. Do people actually think these things just because the little boy wants to play with fucking Barbie dolls? Really? How the fuck did you people survive this long to become parents? Over the years, I've learned some things about gender that could have saved me from worry and made me a more supportive parent. I'm sharing them now in hopes that other parents can benefit from my hindsight. Number one, I wasn't alone. Now there are many more parents like Laurie Durran, who's the arsehole we just discussed, and Cheryl Kilo Davis, who I'll get to in a minute, writing books, of course they are, and speaking out in support of their children who don't fit gender stereotypes. There are terms like gender creative, gender expansive, and gender non-conforming to describe our children. A study carried out by the GLSEN and Harris Interactive found that nearly 1 in 10 elementary school children say the way they look or act doesn't fit expectations based on gender. Really? That sounds quite interesting, actually. Should we take a closer look at this study? For those of you who don't know, the GLSEN is the Gay, Lesbian and Straight Education Network, which works to document the prevalence of biased language, name-calling and bullying at the secondary school level. They believe that this study gives us an important context for the discussion of bullying and harassment across school grades and a better insight into the precursors of the types of biased language and bullying that characterise secondary schools. Excellent. Let's take a look at some of their key findings. So after all their hard research, this is what they were able to find. 51% of students say that students at their school make comments such as retard or spaz sometimes, often, or all the time, with 45% of teachers reporting hearing students make comments like spaz or retard sometimes, often, or very often. It's interesting to note that they decide to list words said sometimes and words said all the time in the same category. 45% of students report hearing comments like "that's so gay," "you're so gay." 49% of teachers say they hear the word gay in a negative way. 39% of students say they hear things like boys should not do or should not wear. 33% say they hear kids at their school say there are things that girls should not do or should not wear. 48% of teachers report that they hear students making sexist remarks, at least sometimes, at their school. 26% of both students and teachers report hearing other students make comments like fag or lesbo, and 26% of students and 21% of teachers hear students say bad or mean things about people because of their race or ethnic background at least sometimes. Well, those results are just horrifying. I'm sure none of us could have possibly imagined that vile remarks like spaz and "that's so gay" were being carelessly thrown about by children. What I find remarkable is that people seem convinced that teaching school kids about gender fluidity is somehow going to stop this type of name calling. This is a part of school, whether you like it or not. This is an article from May of last year, and it reads, "Gender fluidity, schools to teach there's no such thing as boys and girls." Gender fluidity is a relatively new concept that some school districts are considering adding to their curriculum. One of the nation's largest public school systems is preparing to include gender identity to its classroom curriculum, including lessons on sexual fluidity and spectrum, the idea that there's no such thing as 100% boys or 100% girls. Fairfax County Public School released a report recommending changes to their family life curriculum for grades 7 through 12. The changes, which critics call radical gender ideology, will be formally introduced next week. The larger picture is this is really an attack on nature itself, the created order, said Peter Sprigg of the Family Research Council. Human beings are created male and female, but the current transgender ideology goes way beyond that. They're telling us you can be both genders, you can be no gender, you can be a gender that you make up for yourself, and we're supposed to affirm that. Again, no, this is exactly what pisses me off. This is not the transgender ideology. It's not. This is a completely different box of crazy. Transgender people just want to transition to the opposite sex and go about their lives and not give a fuck about identity politics. These crazy people that are trying to say that there's no such thing in men and women have nothing to do with the transgender movement. People need to stop making that mistake. Anyway, the plan calls for teaching 7th graders about transgenderism and 10th graders about the concept that sexuality is a broader spectrum, but it sure smells like unadulterated sex indoctrination. 8th graders will be taught that individual identity occurs over a lifetime and includes the component of sexual orientation and gender identity. Individual identity will also be described as having 4 parts: biological gender, gender identity, gender role, and sexual orientation. Lessons have not been developed for the proposed lesson objectives because of the need to develop lessons. The proposed objectives would not be implemented until fall 2016. The Family Research Council's Sprigg said there's a pretty good reason why they can't produce a textbook about fluidity. It's an ideological concept, it's not a scientific one. This is the point I've been trying to make about non-binary, gender fluidity and all that the whole time. It is an ideology. It is not a scientific concept. With that in mind, I'd like to look at one more example of these parents who raise their children as gender variants. This is the website of Cheryl Kilo Davis, who refers to her son as Princess Boy, and you can visit her website at myprincessboy.com. Kilo Davis is the award-winning author, of course she is, of the breakthrough bestseller My Princess Boy. She's also an expert on acceptance, diversity, and inclusion, because that's apparently a thing now. Her own exploration of acceptance for herself and her children led to the idea for her groundbreaking book about her younger son who likes pretty things, including sparkly dresses, the colour pink, and ballet costumes. Are you seeing a trend here? I mean, this really says it all to me. In her own exploration of herself, she somehow managed to drag her poor kid into it as well. Originally written to explain her son's fondness for pretty things to teachers and fellow students, My Princess Boy became a movement of acceptance for every child who has ever felt left out or misunderstood solely because they're different. And this part is important. What young Dyson will make of this very public story of acceptance when he is older remains to be seen. Most teenagers cringe when their mother brings out the baby photos, and such a widely available book will mean he has nowhere to hide. Mrs. Kalo Davis told the Today Show how it was her older son, Jacoby, 8, who convinced her to let Dyson dress as he wished. She said that she didn't believe her son would be bullied any less if he wore boys' clothes, and that her book was a wake-up call. I understand that we all want life to be easy for our children. I want that too, but I don't think bullying will stop if my son wears traditional boys' clothes. Then you don't know what the fuck you're talking about, sweetheart. You've made a spectacle out of your own son, slapped his face and name on books and websites and articles, all while he was too young to understand the consequences. You're selfish and self-serving, and I won't be surprised if your son grows up to resent you for it. When did harmless games of dress-up become a movement for acceptance? When did a child's natural curiosity for experimentation and self-expression become something to be exploited and monetized by their parents? From raising my rainbow to my princess son. Do you think these young boys turned to their mothers and said, I'm a gender variant? No. All of these kids, all they done was pick up a doll or put on a dress, and it was their parents that called them the gender variant, the non-binary, the gender fluid, the gender expansive. It was them that wrote the book, it was them that attended the interviews, and it was them that went on to the talk shows. These cases are nothing short of exploitation for the parents' own selfish agenda, and nobody should be supporting this disgusting behaviour. Children as young as 13 have been asked to pick their gender from a list of 25 options. The 13 to 18-year-olds were given choices including trigender and gender fluid, as well as the traditional boy and girl. Calvert says the metropolitan elite are now obsessed by gender issues. According to the new orthodoxy, whether you're a boy or a girl, or something in between, is just another lifestyle choice. No one wants the tiny number of transgender children to be teased, but can't that just be dealt with under the general heading, bullying? It seems over the top to browbeat children into believing any attempt to categorise people into male or female is on par with racism. There's another issue here too, which is whether schools should even be asking such questions. If a child really does believe they're born in the wrong body, that's something they might want to share with their parents, but not necessarily with their schools. Call me an old cynic, but in my experience, children cannot always be trusted to handle such delicate information with tact and sensitivity. This absurd questionnaire is part of a worrying trend whereby schools are interfering in all sorts of areas that are best left to parents and carers. Why don't we have a little look at these options then? So the first one is girl and the second one is boy. Fair enough. The third one is tomboy, which is, for fuck's sake, that's not a gender. A tomboy is a little girl who's into typically boys' things. Number 4 is female. Number 5 is male. Number 6 is young woman. Number 7 is young man. What is the difference between girl, female, and young woman with the exception of age? And boy, male, and young man. They're all the same gender, they're just different ages. For fuck's sake, I can't. I'm only at number 7, I can't. Number 8 is trans girl, number 9 is trans boy, number 10 is gender fluid, and it's described as those who have different gender identities at different times. We then have agender, those with no gender identity or a neutral identity. 12 is androgynous, partly male and female, not one specific sex. 13 is bigender. This is one I've seen pop up relatively often but never actually read the definition. Those who experience two gender identities, either at the same time or swapping between the two. These can be male and female or other identities. How the fuck did this? This is unbelievable. I feel like I'm reading something from Tumblr. I cannot, my fucking brain is screaming. How could this? Number 14 is non-binary, a blanket term to describe those who do not feel exclusively male or female. 15 is demi-boy, someone whose identity is only partly male, regardless of their birth gender. They may or may not also identify as another gender. Demi-girl is the same as the above except it's female. 17 is gender queer, those who don't go along with the traditional gender distinctions. Yeah, I think that's pretty much all these fucking nut jobs. 18, gender non-conforming, again that covers the whole lot. 19, trigender, shifts between three genders, which could include male, female, and genderless or another combination. Okay, officially, trigender is now my new least favourite one of these bullshit terms. 20, all genders, someone who in the middle of boy and girl, an individual who identifies somewhere in between male and female. Intersex, someone with physical, genetic, or hormonal features of a male or female. That's not even a gender, that's a condition, you fucking dicks. 23, not sure. 24, rather not say. 25, others. Tell me, are there any sane, rationally minded people out there who got through that list with a straight face? This is what they are pushing into schools. And this is why I have a problem. To all you people calling me a true scum cunt, who ask me why I even bother to make the videos that I do, this is why. You can identify however the fuck you want. You're an adult. You can make your own choices. But how dare you try to push your political agenda onto children, you self-absorbed arseholes. If you support this movement, this attempt to teach that gender isn't binary in schools, that you can tell children they can be trigender or demigender, that they can use whatever fucking bathroom they please, that they can apply whatever pronouns that they want to themselves, you're delusional and you need to fuck off back to Tumblr and keep your grubby little paws out of our educational system. Now, with that being said, thanks for watching.